Hi, everybody. Welcome to the 2021 December SJAA Imaging SIG meeting. And we're going to start a series of talks on, believe it or not, astroimaging for the next at least 3 months. And this month we have a guest, an imager from Pittsburgh, John Pane, who's going to tell us all about his November new moon project. So John, take it away.
Thank you. Hi. Thank you for inviting me here. And I will get started. So what I'll cover today is first how I met Hi and how he convinced me to come speak tonight. And then I'll talk a little bit about how I got started in astrophotography and the progression in equipment that I've undergone since I started. And then I'll talk a little bit about the constraints in my ability to image and why I only get out on somewhat rare occasions by many standards of imagers. And because I don't get out very much, I make certain choices about what I do when I can get out and what equipment I buy, and talk a little bit about that. And then if there's time at the end, I'll make a few comments about processing. I'm not going to go into a lot of details, but a couple of things as I've worked on images, improving my images over the past few years, a few things that seem to help a lot in bringing out the detail. So I encourage you to stop me and ask questions or make comments as they come up throughout the talk. So how did I meet Hi? I was having some problems with K-Star's Echos ND, this setup that I run partly on my laptop, partly on a Raspberry Pi that's attached to my mount. And I asked Hi some questions because I knew that he had been doing some development work on the autofocus module, and he was very gracious in responding to my emails, and there were many of them. And he offered helpful suggestions, and we went back and forth in, I think, 28 different messages, where Hi stuck with me through that, and eventually I solved my problems. Then later, after that weekend I'm going to be talking about, I reported back on how well everything worked over those 4 dark, clear nights. And he seemed interested that I actually imaged 8 targets in 4 nights. And so when I finished processing all 8 of them, which took a few weeks, I sent him the results, and he replied asking me to come here and suggested a general theme of what I could talk about, which I'm reinterpreting as, given how infrequently I get out there, getting a year's worth of decent, not perfect, but decent images in one weekend. Or, I guess the corollary of that is I'm not an expert, and these images are certainly flawed. I know that many of you probably are more expert than I, and so I welcome your criticism and suggestions along the way.
And John, may I add a year's worth of decent images from Pittsburgh, not from, high up in the Sierras.
Yes, that's right. But right here on my driveway, where, as you'll see, that's kind of where I feel stuck, just because of the effort of moving equipment around and how far away the dark sites are and things like that. So a little bit about how I got started in this. I think it started when I was young. My father was a pretty good amateur photographer, day and night, actually mostly daytime. He took pictures of family events, and sometimes family members or friends actually asked him to be the wedding photographer or the photographer at some other big event. So sometimes he had a second camera. Sometimes he asked me to follow around as the second shooter, and I learned a little bit of photography doing that. But he also had a little bit of an interest in viewing and photographing night sky phenomena. When he found out about them, which I think was usually through the newspaper or the radio, and that would be like sightings of comets or aurora, possible sightings of such things, because he did want to show us those things, and we went out there many times looking for them, but we rarely actually saw what we were looking for. And that included the famous comet Kohoutek in 1974. We were skunked like most people were after the big hype about that comet. And, it was disappointing because, my dad was excited and we hoped to see it. And we took short drives to different places where we could see the horizon and different things, but we never saw anything. And fortunately, a couple years later, I didn't realize it was 2 years, but Comet West appeared. This is not my image, but we saw that comet from our backyard. My dad woke us up, us kids. I was about 13 at the time, and it was amazing. It was a little cloudy, so we could see it through broken clouds, but we did see these striations, and it was so exciting. But my dad had his camera out, and he said to me, hold the button down, hold the shutter button down for a while, which, I had used the camera in the daytime, but I'd never done that. I didn't really know what I was doing, but I stood there and held the shutter button. And then a few weeks later, when the slides came back from being developed, I was totally amazed with the photograph we got. It did have clouds in it, like I said. I wish I could find it. I can't find it anymore, but I was just impressed with it, and that thought stuck with me for a long time. I didn't do any other astrophotography until comets started to come about in the 90s. First comet Yakutaki, where I got excited and decided to image that a couple of nights with film. And then having had that success, of course, the next year, Comet Hale-Bopp was here, and I went out many nights. This is just a sampling of 4 photographs of that comet that I took. And I continued to, essentially what I had was a film camera with a 50mm lens. And so I was imaging, when I was doing astrophotography, it was large objects, often sort of rare events. Another thing was a Leonid meteor storm in 2001. It was very foggy in Pittsburgh that night, but I drove in the fog about an hour and a half up into the mountains and got above the fog and saw hundreds and hundreds of meteors, but one that was quite bright. This one I happened to capture. And what you're seeing in the center of the screen is a composite of several images that are on the right there. Well, the first 2 that are on the right that showed first the flash of the meteor and then these trails of gases or dust or whatever that were blowing in the upper atmosphere. And those persisted for a long time, even after a change of film. I ran out of color film, and that last image is a black and white image with a new roll of film. I can't remember how long it persisted, but it was a long time. And this image actually got quite a bit of attention. First, NASA asked to include it on a report they were doing about near-Earth objects, and then several media throughout the world, magazines and newspapers, published the image with commentary, and it also was put into science museum exhibits in 2 cities in America. I think they're both there, although I haven't confirmed that recently. And then, another comet in 2007, 2008. By then I had a DSLR, but still pretty rudimentary. I think I had a simple tracker, but fairly rudimentary equipment at the time. And I photographed Comet Holmes a number of times throughout its apparition. It had a sudden brightening, and started out as a very small object. Here you can see on the 25th of October, there's a tiny little dot there. And then I went out as many times as I could, whether there was moon or no moon. And I just tried to get images on as many nights as I could from that October date into March. And then I aligned them and saw the path that it took across the sky. It was actually, what do you call that when the planet goes backwards? I always forget the name of it when when the Earth's rotation kind of passes the object you're looking at, and so it appears to move backwards in the sky. Anyway, I forget the word for it, but anyways,
retrograde motion.
Yes,
maybe?
retrograde motion. So this was essentially part of its retrograde motion during this time when it had done this outburst. And the first images through January 30th were the astronomy picture of the day, the only time I've had that honor, back in 2008. And I captured a few more images after they published that APOD. So as I said, I started out with a film camera and a 50mm lens. And actually, you know, if you think of the 25 years from when I started imaging with Comet Yakutaki, and I'm not counting, of course, the time when I was a kid, the first 7 years was with film. The first 17 years was with a DSLR. And it's only the past 3 years that I first had a modified DSLR that was sensitive to hydrogen alpha. And then 1 year ago, I got the dedicated astro camera that I'm using now. And then as far as optics goes, I was using camera lenses for the first 20 years, and I only got a telescope 5 years ago. The scope is a Stellar View 130mm triplet, and this is the Meade mount with the auto guider. The OTA on the left is that AutoStar auto guider system. There's actually two cameras with two OTAs, one wide field and one narrow field, and it uses those to help with high precision pointing as well as guiding and a few other features of the thing. And that picture of the scope was taken when I still had a DSLR. As I said, I now have a dedicated astro cam. And the scope is on a dolly to move it in and out of my garage. It stays in the garage almost all the time, but when I want to image, I take it out and I have to sort of jack up the dolly so the wheels are off the ground and then align the camera. And it's a bit of a time-consuming process setting up because of that. This is a more detailed progression of equipment. I'm not going to read through all of that, but the important things, or the things that I'm using now, are all equipment that I purchased in 2015 or later. The LX850 mount, the telescope, and then I started the automation with the Raspberry Pi a couple years ago, and then I got the dedicated camera. So as I said, imaging opportunities are somewhat rare for me. Part of it is that Pittsburgh's weather is not great. According to the National Centers for Environmental Information, which is part of NOAA, Pittsburgh averages 59 completely clear days per year. They don't count it if it's, you know, there's clouds passing over, but there's still a lot of sun in the sky. And of course, when you're imaging at night, that matters. So we'll say 59 nights a year. It might not be exactly right, but and then if you think, well, the moon interferes for 3/4 of those, then maybe there's 15 days a year when I have clear moonless skies. The past few years, we've had wildfire smoke in the summer, especially in, you know, the August, which is the clearest month in Pittsburgh. And of course, sometimes there are clear dark skies, and somehow I don't notice that is happening, and I miss out. As I said, having that scope on a dolly means I have, you know, substantial setup time. I continue to work on speeding that up. And just sort of the terrain around my house, my yard, as well as association rules about what I can put in the front of the house, essentially prevent me from putting in something more permanent, like an observatory or a shed or something. Now, honestly, there are ways I could increase opportunities. You know, I could go somewhere dark and stay there for an extended time. I could get get some narrowband filters, but honestly, I think that's enough given everything else I've got going on. You know, first, image processing is a larger time investment than actually being out there imaging. And then I have other hobbies and family and work obligations. And so, you know, I think that, you know, often, you know, sometimes I kind of force myself to go out when the weather is nice because I know it's a rare opportunity. But If I had a lot more opportunities, I think I would be letting them pass anyway, because this is about as much as I can fit into my schedule. So I get out, probably, I would say an average year over the past couple of years has been maybe 4 or 5, maybe 6 times per year. Sometimes there's a couple consecutive nights. And the advantage of consecutive nights is if I know it's going to be that way, I leave the image set up and polar aligned, and I leave the rig out there and polar aligned. So I have less setup time the next few nights. And that's what happened in early November. This is the light pollution map for Pittsburgh. That cross in the center is the location. This is Pittsburgh to my southeast, and I'm right on the border of like a Bortle 5, Bortle 6 area. The other cities here, we have Detroit up here in the upper left-hand corner. Diagonally down towards Pittsburgh is Cleveland, and then off to the left is Columbus. At the top of the screen is Buffalo, New York, and at the far right bottom is Washington, D.C. The dark sites around me are first, Cherry Springs is a dark sky park in north central Pennsylvania. And it's about a 4-hour drive from my home to get there. The other is down in the West Virginia area, and the areas around Spruce Knob and Green Bank, West Virginia. So, if I want to get to really dark sites, it's an endeavor. I've gone to Cherry Springs once when I had less equipment to haul around and camped there for a few nights. It was a great experience and, tremendous. I want to go back, but now it's a lot harder to do that. So my strategy is that I try to maximize imaging productivity when I'm out there imaging. And that gets to some of the choices I make about what I do. And first is that I use a one-shot color camera. I have the ZWO ASI 6200 MC one-shot camera, because what that lets me do is capture through red, green, and blue filters simultaneously. I don't have to do them serially. And of course, there's compromises with the Bayer sensor, but part of the spatial resolution, I figured I'm going to get the highest resolution camera I can with small pixels. And so when I'm viewing my images at a typical size, if I'm filling up the screen and not cropping too much, then I have very good resolution. And the Bayer image, of course, there's less sensitivity for the L, capturing everything. But I think for what I do and the amount of time I have to be out there, it's a good compromise. I also picked the camera. It was just a fantastic move up from the DSLRs that I was using. I was using Canon cameras, which were good, but the differences in readout noise, amp glow, the fact that it's cooled, so there's a lot less shot noise, and having 16 bits and high quantum efficiency, all really, I think, are making a big difference in what I've been able to do. One downside of not using narrowband filters is that I can't really separate out various emission lines. And so a lot of my images are very red, and I think someday maybe I'm going to get bored with that. Using false colors is at least makes the images more interesting rather than looking at red all the time. And then Hai asked me how I picked these targets. And really what I did was I saw that there was likely to be a few days opportunity. And last minute I got onto this site Telescopius or whatever it's called. And I basically put in some parameters there to look at what the possibilities were. And basically what I did was I looked for objects that were going to be above 30 degrees of altitude for at least 3 hours, so that I could image them for at least 3 hours without dealing with gradients and high air mass at lower altitudes. And also objects that would occupy a substantial portion of a 3 by 2 degree field of view. I tried to pick some diversity, so I was finding a lot of nebulosity, so I threw in the witch head and that other image of the VDB objects, because I thought, oh, I don't want to just capture all just a bunch of red objects. So tried to vary that a little bit, and pick some things that I hadn't imaged before and that seemed a little bit novel. Once I had a list of those things, I used rise and set times rise and set relative to a 30-degree altitude. And when those objects were crossing meridians, to try to figure out opportunities to sequence the various objects, so that I would get essentially one before it hit the meridian, and then another object after the meridian, either one that was rising toward the meridian or one that was setting from the meridian. And so essentially trying to get 3 or 4 objects, 3 or 4 hours per object. And part of the reasoning about 3 and 4 hours is that if I doubled that time and used the entire night, or used all the time that they are above 30 degrees to image, I might increase the signal to noise ratio by a factor of 1.4. So the payoff of doubling is a trade-off I'm willing to make in favor of just getting twice as many targets. I'm going to just pause for a second in case anyone wants to comment or ask anything. Nothing?
Well, I guess I could ask, have you thought about the tri-band or whatever the various narrowband filters designed for one-shot color?
Yeah, a little bit. I think that it puts me in a different realm in terms of the amount of time I have to be out there, probably multiple nights per target, because I'd be shooting through 2 filters, right? The filter, the narrowband filter, plus the extra filter on the Bayer sensor. Each filter is probably only hitting one of the 3 colors, or making it through only one of the 3 colors. So I think I lose a lot of efficiency in terms of the time out there. It is something that maybe I will experiment with if I really get bored with the limited color palette that I can get with what I have. One other thing I like about RGB, of course, is that it's very easy to get natural colors of stars, and having images that are somewhat realistic. A lot of times people who don't know much about astronomy ask me if that's what it really looks like. And at least I can say, well, those are the colors. You probably can't see the colors with your naked eye, but I'm not making up that it looks this color. So yeah, I do like that sort of authenticity of RGB. But yes, that's a great question, Glenn, about something that I probably will consider in the long run, about as a way. Or maybe what I would do instead is get a mono camera if I'm going to start messing around with filters.
And I guess that's one of the downsides of having such a big sensor, is then the filters become very expensive.
That's true. Yes. Yeah, and the camera was expensive too. Yeah, and it's all a factor. Although really, I really, did not consider seriously a mono camera. Coming from the DSLR and being used to that, and seeing, at least on paper, what I thought was going to be a lot of improvement in switching to the dedicated astro camera. I thought that would be my first move, and then I can later sell this equipment and get something different if I want to change that decision.
Okay.
Anything else? Anybody else? Okay. Well, I've been at it for about a half hour. I hope you do have some questions. Oh, so this is just a this is the piece of paper that I was like, sort of working out what I was going to do, what was available, what time that they crossed the meridian, what time they said, how high they got it when they were at the meridian. And then those arrows were just me sort of figuring out how to sequence them so that like two things that would fit together well in one night. And essentially that's how I decided, what to do the first night. And then I picked the next two for the next night and so forth. And there's more scratch on the back side of this little piece of paper, but that's it. I don't have a more formal way of doing it. There's probably software that would have helped me figure this all out and organize it, but I just winged it.
So did you like stay up all night for 4 nights and, handhold it and make sure it followed your sequence?
No, I tried to get some naps, but I usually tried to be awake when the camera, when things were getting dangerous in terms of the camera possibly colliding with the tripod legs or a meridian flip supposed to happen. I did for the first time have successful automated meridian flip with that setup, the ECOS and everything during that weekend. But I also did have a collision with the tripod that weekend, and other weird things happened that I didn't anticipate, like the object sets behind my house. It's still about 30 degrees, but it's behind my roof. And so, I do have to babysit a little bit. I can't go to sleep all night.
There is a chat question. If you can't see it, I can read it, but can you read it?
Would you please? I could probably bring it up, but it'll be quicker if you.
So Pawan asks, do you find that it takes a long time to stack and process large images from this camera? Oh, and by the way, before you answer, let me suggest anybody, feel free to, you don't have to put messages in the chat if you don't want. Feel free to speak up, but go ahead.
Yes, it takes an extraordinary amount of time to process these images. And I'll talk a little bit about my processing toward the end. And this talk is not that much longer, but I will get to that a little bit. But I haven't really added up how long it takes, but essentially my computer is running with the fans going essentially all day long. Sometimes I don't have to attend to it until I have everything integrated and I start doing sort of manual choices. It's just a whole series of very, very long runs of various PixInsight things, and it takes hours and hours and hours for that to complete. It's a huge amount of data. I try to keep all of the working files on my SSD, but I have to kind of prune things. So, there's all these intermediate files are generated. And if I know that I am not going to need those intermediate files, I have to clean up so I don't run out of room on my fast drive on my laptop. And so it is a bit of a hassle, definitely. And I'm hoping to get a faster computer sometime that will help a little bit with that.
How long are your exposures? Like how many FITS files are you talking about per image?
Yeah, so I've been taking 2-minute exposures. And so if I'm imaging for 4 hours, I'm starting out with 200 plus images. Wait, is that right? 30 times 4, no, 120 or so, 120, 150 is a common number that I'm starting out with. And then very often there's clouds coming through or my mount glitches and, the stars are, the stars move. So I discard, sometimes I can keep all my subframes, but, sometimes I discard a substantial number, mainly because of clouds. And so, that narrows it down. And, I'm a little bit selective if I have a lot of images in terms of, sort of weeding out some of the less strong ones, maybe if they have a larger background gradient or something.
Question for Hai. Does K-stars let you put in a horizon line or an image of your observing location or something that would help you determine when things are going behind trees or houses or?
Yeah, you can do the, you may remember, I actually get presented about this last year. I added this thing where you can take a panorama of your, your imaging location. If you consistently image from the same place, and, you could sort of see it then, right? You can,
Okay, yeah.
that's a planetarium, and see when it clears those trees. I
'Cause
do that.
That's a big part of my planning, and of course I'm on Stellarium, but
Yeah, it works just
Yeah.
like Stellarium in that
yeah,
sense. And that's what I do. And of course, you don't want to start imaging the second it clears that tree, right? Because
yeah.
you know how it goes. You'll slew to somewhere just below the tree, even though, yeah, anyway, you get the idea.
Well, yeah, it's hard to get the exactly the scene, whatever the background landscape exactly matching the reality.
Right.
You're
Anyway, yes.
usually off by a little bit. Yeah.
But it sounds like John has a pretty clear horizon. I mean, is that right, John?
I do. I'm obstructed a little bit to the north. So if the object is in the north and it starts to set toward the northern horizon, northwestern horizon, then the house is in the way. But otherwise, it's not too bad. With my constraint of 30 degrees, below that, there are obstructions, a lot of obstructions. And when I try to do things to the far south, I do get a lot of light pollution from Pittsburgh. Okay, so thank you for the questions, and just speak up if you have another one, even if I don't pause to ask. Let's see here. So why 2-minute subframes? I mentioned that I take 2 minutes. The way I selected that was there's a few Excel spreadsheets around. One of them is called the Ideal Exposure Calculator. There's another one on a Cloudy Nights thread. I'll show you part of it in a second. I didn't know if these slides will be available later, but some of these links are clickable. If people do want that, I can provide it. But essentially, that thing uses a lot of
John,
parameters.
I can add it to the comments of or add it to the meetup or whatever. If you put it online somewhere and give me a link, I'll do that.
Sure. Okay, I will endeavor to do that. And if you have it on YouTube, you might also be able to put it in the YouTube description. Anyway, these calculators, you input a lot of facts about your camera and the sky conditions where you are imaging and the filters you're using and so forth. And it calculates an exposure that at which point the light pollution essentially swamps out the read noise by a factor of 10. And so essentially, once you've subtracted the light pollution out of there, your read noise is also gone. And going longer than that wouldn't improve your noise that much, but if at all. I don't really fully know exactly what would happen if you went longer, but it would saturate star cores, and also in my case, because my mount is imperfect, it would increase the risk of losing the subframe because of tracking errors or passing clouds. And so I picked 2 minutes as sort of like an ideal exposure time. It's also, by the way, with a gain of 100 on this camera. This will give you a range of exposure choices in terms of time, length of exposure and gain to use and so forth. And let's see here. I think I have, here's somebody made like a little help thing where you enter things like your sky brightness, your telescope and camera specs, the filter you're using, which is a drop-down menu over here. You say what filter you have, and you can override it by putting in bandwidths if necessary. And I'm not sure exactly what the transmission efficiency is. That's quantum efficiency plus something else. And then this is that swamp factor, like how much brighter the sky is going to be versus the read noise. And then how long your total integration time will be. And then based on that, it gives you parameters like the number of exposures, the gain, and the subframe duration. So it's a handy calculator if you haven't tried it. This one that I have the screenshot from, I believe, is set up with parameters for many of the ZWO cameras and possibly more. I'm not sure exactly how extensive it is. It's been a while since I looked at it. Whoops, I did the wrong thing there.
Can I ask you a question about that?
Sure.
I haven't participated in, but I've noticed a conversation on the IndieLib forums where, people were requesting the feature of a calculator like this for K-stars, or in ECOS, I should say. And I don't know. I mean, I was pretty ambivalent about that, sort of thinking, well, you do that once and, like, why do you really need to redo this calculation? You have a rough idea that, anyway, that was my point of view. So you disagree with that? Or do you agree that, yeah, you've done this, Pittsburgh with your RGB camera is about 2 minutes and that's fine? Or would you
right
optimize?
No, I'm with you on that. I think that for someone like me who's imaging from the same place with the same equipment, I did that once and then I went back again just to refine, because I learned a little more and I wanted to make sure I entered everything correctly. But then, I just have been sticking with this 2 minute thing. I've played around a little bit with, plus or minus, within those sort of boundaries that they suggest as the output from these calculators. But it's true, I don't use it a lot. It's been probably, 6 months or more since I last looked at the calculator until tonight when I grabbed this screenshot for the presentation.
Any disagreements from the others?
Well, I was going to chime in that, Sharp and Francesco can chime in. He's going to be the expert, I think. But, SharpCap has a feature where you can actually characterize your camera. So if there wasn't one of these spreadsheets that somebody had already developed for your model of camera, then you could use that to take some simple exposures, and it's supposed to then do some of this kind of thing for you. So a little more advanced feature set, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think when it characterizes it, it's going to look at your dark current, and who knows, maybe it will look at, the sky background for that night, or, that location. I think that's what they're doing, right? They're measuring those two things that he's hand inputting.
Yes.
But I mean, I feel like this is something that needs to be optimized, is my question, or is it, you're in the ballpark, you're fine?
Nina also has a similar function, and it's based on Robin Glover's stuff in SharpCap. Yeah.
There is this section up here where you can take an image and input parameters like the background sky glow, the dark signal, the bias, and the exposure duration of this image that you took. And I guess that feeds into some of the parameters about the camera.
Yeah, I seem to remember when, I recently switched from a ASI 1600 to a ASI 294. And there's some sort of special things with that camera that happen around a certain gain level and stuff. So there was some amount of, and I use this type of spreadsheet, if not the same one, but for that camera. But there was some amount of stuff where you had to kind of enter I guess you entered there the camera gain of 100, but you had to make some choices, about what what you wanted to use parameter wise.
Yes. I think that, hopefully, like I said, I haven't looked at it recently, but I think that when they say that they've like characterized the cameras, that would include that sort of change in the way it performs when you get to certain gain levels. The camera I have does the same thing right at gain 100, and that's why I use that. It reduces the read noise at some cost to dynamic range.
In general, with the CMOS cameras now, the readout noise is so low that it's no longer really a problem to swamp, to expose long enough that you swamp readout noise. The main concern is the one that John was also mentioning, that you don't want to go too far in making the exposure longer, otherwise you saturate your stars.
Yes. Thank you. Is it true, Francesco, even for dark sky sites, that it's very easy to swamp the read noise?
It's a little bit harder, but for instance, when I go to a Bortle 3 location, I could, 3 minutes would be sufficient. And I normally do 5 instead, just because I'm lazy and I like to reuse my library of darks.
Yeah. Interesting. Any other comments, questions?
Yeah, when I use Nina's feature to find the exposure lengths, it always gives me, like, with my ASI 1600, the optimal exposure length is like 15 seconds. And I ignore that completely, saying, okay, I can't take that many exposures.
Yeah.
So I always like ignore that and just settle up at like something which will give me right enough exposures which my computer can handle, like which effectively I end up with like 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes, and what my mount can do, which is like Atlas Pro. Because if I do 3 minutes, I lose half my subs because something happens to that mount.
Yeah, it's similar for me. All right, well, the last topic I have is a little bit about the processing that I do. I'm just going to talk about a few things that I've started doing recently that I think have helped. The first is that PixInsight recently added the ability, when you're debayering the images, to rather than create a color image, to create separate RGB images. And I actually was talking with Juan, the developer of PixInsight, about this, because I was getting differential atmospheric dispersion in my RB&G channel. So that I was having trouble keeping the colors aligned. It was not an optics problem, it was atmospheric dispersion. And this enabled me to essentially eliminate that problem. That now, for the most part, I mean, like when you look at my images really close, you'll probably find color aberrations of various kinds, but it helped a lot, let's say, with that atmospheric dispersion problem. And basically what you do is you align each of those color images to one. I align the red and the blue to the green, allowing for distortion. And what happens then is that those 3 channels are right on top of each other. But then what that means is that it's also tripling the number of subframes I'm dealing with. I'm not dealing with 1 color subframe for every subframe that I shot. I'm now dealing with 3 mono subframes for each subframe I shot. And so there's a lot more files being handled. The next thing is another relatively new feature that I've been using. It's computationally expensive, but I think it's helping. And that's a script that's called normalized scale gradient. What this thing does is it uses photometric techniques to figure out how bright the gradients are in front of stars. It's essentially, I think, if I'm understanding correctly what it does, it's using known information about the brightness of stars, and then any excess is caused by atmospheric things. And so if that's varying across the frame, that's an indication of a gradient. And what this software does is it essentially tries to match all of your subframes to have the same gradient as a master. So you pick your best subframe, which might be the one right at the meridian or as close to the meridian as you can get. And then all the other ones are matched to that through this process. So then when you get to the point where you're doing background removal, you should have a simpler gradient to deal with, maybe less severe, but also less complex. So that takes a long time. You have to do it separately by each channel.
So this applies to each FITS file or each integrated file, post.
This is done on the subframe. So like after I do the debayering, I go through subframe selector and decide which images I'm keeping, which subframes I'm keeping. Then I register them. And then they go into the normalized scale gradients. And so all the
So each
subframes
FITS file, each FITS
Yeah.
file gets a separate, there's a different gradient. Because, okay.
Yeah, there's a different gradient in each subframe, and it's trying to essentially eliminate the differences. So it's not removing gradients, it is just matching them to your master. So anyway, it seems to help, but it is a very computationally expensive thing. And I think that some people have done some measures related to like signal to noise ratios or something that demonstrate quantitatively that it is better, but I haven't fully comprehended all of that information. Let's see. So the next thing that I have been really careful about lately is background extraction. And the problem is that, first of all, now that I have my images as 3 separate colors, I do the background extraction separately on each color. I don't do it when I have a color image. And one of the things about background extraction is to make sure that you're not getting any signal. And so usually I'm using a brightness limit that's trying to make sure that I'm capturing only background. But if I have 3 different colors that have not yet been color corrected, then this might be a good upper bound for the background for one color, but not another. And so that I think was causing some problems. So now, because I'm doing this separate RGB channel thing flowing all the way from all the way from when I debayered, by the time I integrate the images, I still have 3 separate monochrome images representing the colors. And so I can do the background extraction separately. But I don't whether I use automatic or dynamic background extraction, I do not let it do the subtraction itself. What I do is I try to minimize the amount of subtraction I'm doing, just enough to normalize the image. So if it's claiming that the background is ranges from 0.05 to 0.1 across the background image that is created, I subtract the minimum from the whole image and only subtract whatever's left from my image. So essentially, I'm leaving a constant pedestal, you might call it, there, rather than subtracting the background all the way to 0 from what it thought the background was. Because I like having a little bit of room at the bottom of my image for later when I'm doing things like stretching, and eventually I can clip off that pedestal, if you will. So anyway, that seems to have helped. I used to have a lot of problems with background extraction, leaving behind gradients or revealing noise in the image that I wasn't satisfied with, and somehow this seems to help with that. Is really trying to limit how much is subtracted when I'm doing the background extraction.
So you're saying that you make a background image and you use pixel math or something like that to subtract it?
Yes, that's right. So essentially what I do is I calculate the background using ABE or DBE.
Oh, you got it there.
Yeah, and then what I do is I figure out what the background is minus the minimum value of that background. So this is the residual after I subtract the minimum value, and then I subtract that residual from the target. And then this sort of comes up again later. I use photometric color calibration to try to get accurate color in the stars. If you don't do background neutralization, you are not going to have a neutral background. For a long time, I used the built-in background neutralization, but again, I was confronted with the same problem that my RG and B levels are not the same. And so when I was setting an upper limit on what to consider background, that might only be truly applicable to one of the three channels. And so essentially what I do is a similar process to try. Essentially what I do is I figure out through inspection throughout the image a minimum value in each channel. And then I subtract, I again do this sort of residualization where whatever the minute, like if my blue has the smallest minimum value, then I don't subtract anything from blue. I just subtract from red and green enough to make it match the blue. And so I get a neutral background, again, subtracting the minimal amount that I need to do that. And I think, I don't know how big of an error it is to subtract more in background neutralization, but that is applied after the color calibration. So it does kind of corrupt a little bit the calibration that you did. It might not be a meaningful amount, but by minimizing the subtraction there, it also reduces the amount of corruption that happens to the star colors that have been calibrated already.
Have you considered fitting the RG and B masters to each other before doing combination and PCC? In this way, essentially a background neutralization wouldn't introduce any color shift. And it's very similar to what you're doing, because instead of comparing the gradient to the minimum value, it essentially compares it with the median or average value.
Yeah, good idea. No, I hadn't thought of that. I'm not coming from, I'm new at having separate RG and B channels. So like that idea, sort of hasn't been part of my workflow in the past. So I definitely think about doing that. Is that also something that, like, so if I'm doing that prior to RGB combine, would you then recommend doing the background extraction after they've been combined, since they've been fit to each other?
Well, at that point, you can, instead of doing really a background extraction, you can focus on extracting the gradients.
Yes.
Rather than a baseline. So
yeah.
There's no longer any baseline, essentially.
Okay, and the function you use for that is linear fit?
Linear fit.
Yes, okay, thank you.
And I normally apply it to the image. I use as a reference the image that has the most signal to noise ratio.
Yep.
Which in a one shot color is probably green.
Yes. Again, thank you very much. I will try that.
Of course.
It will definitely save some steps, some manual steps that are annoying to have to do. I think that's the extent of what I have prepared for today. So, I'm happy to continue to answer questions or hear other comments or suggestions about what I'm doing wrong.
I have a question about these 8 images that you are showing. There are quite a few of them that are right in the smack middle of the Milky Way, and the stars are really well controlled. Are you using something like StarNet++ or Star Exterminator to separate stars and nebulae and process them separately?
Not directly. Let's see. I do use the easy star reduction
okay.
Method, which does use StarNet to create a mask, but then is using morphological transformation to reduce
Right.
the stars.
Yep.
And one of these images, I think it's the Crescent Nebula image. I actually ran that multiple times because the background nebulosity was very hard to see. And I think that in some ways it's starting to look excessive from my aesthetic point of view, but I ran it at least twice, maybe 3 times, because I really wanted to be able to see some of that background nebulosity then, and it's very weak.
Yep.
Do you just want to spend a minute going over you actually never showed the pictures.
Yeah, it's true. I could show them. Let's see. Hi, do you mind if I switch over to Flickr to show that rather than?
Oh, I don't care. Do whatever. You're sharing your screen. Sure.
Okay, yes, I'll have to stop share and bring that up. So give me a moment here.
Oh, I see.
Let's see here.
Yeah, if anybody else has questions, of course, speak up. Otherwise, after John shows his images.
Okay. Let's see.
Well, I'd just like to comment that hi, and Glenn, you and Bruce, you might remember when John was talking about his efforts in predicting when the targets would become visible and cross the meridian. I was picturing in my head our experience when we rented that house near Pinnacles, that you guys were all doing automation from inside the ranch, and I had to go out each time to tend to things like meridian flipping, switching targets.
Yeah, bear with me. I'm almost there. For some reason, I have trouble finding. Oh, here it is. Okay. Let's see here. All right. So these are in the order I captured them. They're not the order I processed them. Yeah, I don't have a lot of prepared remarks about the processing of these. I've used pretty much the same workflow with each of them. So, this is M33. I have a little bit of information down here below the image. I always keep forgetting how to do this. Did I stop? Am I still sharing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the H2 regions come through so nicely, with no problem, right?
Yeah, well, sometimes other imagers get more, but that's what I was able to get
Yeah,
with
that looks
this.
great.
Thank you. The jellyfish. This was about 6 hours exposure. This might be the longest series that I had.
Why is it that was exposed longer? It has a bright star near it, but.
To be honest, it was the second image that I was capturing, and I wasn't sure how hard it was going to be. It has a pretty low surface brightness, so I wasn't sure how much I needed, and so I really wanted to get this one, so I imaged it longer than the others. And I think probably what happened was I did M33 while I was waiting for this to get positioned in the sky where I could shoot it for the rest of the night.
Yeah, I know that star near the jellyfish can cause my 1600 issues, but there you go.
Yeah, I might have had to, I can't remember now. There might have been some reflections that I had to work hard to remove. And I do that in Lightroom rather than PixInsight. And I only do that with reflection, like, artifacts like reflections. I don't mess around with the data, but I might have had some reflections from both of these brighter stars in the lower half of the image.
Well, very nice.
So this is the crescent. I think it was probably the last one I processed. And like I said before, the stars look a lot, I don't know, they look almost like noise because they've been suppressed so much. I'm not sure I really like that. I typically wouldn't do that, but that's what I decided to do for this one. And it looks like I forgot to say how long the exposures were. Oh, there it is. 2.4 hours. I probably should have exposed this longer. These are two VDB objects I'd never heard of before. I just did them for something different and something new and something that was less red. And I thought it came out kind of interesting. And, as a reminder, I'm given the total exposure time, not the total amount of time that I actually was out there imaging. As I said earlier, I often have to throw away a lot of subframes and I don't count that. So, this is 2.2 hours, but I might have actually captured 3 or 4 and that's what I ended up with. This is the heart. I was really happy with how this came out. The last time I imaged it, it was with my my Canon DSLR, and I got nothing close to this. So I was really pleased with this. And I also really like this one, the Flaming Star Nebula and the tadpoles at the upper right in IC 410. I thought that the flames were going to be bluer, but that's how they came out. And afterwards, I looked around and I did see some images like that. So I think I didn't do anything wrong about the color of that, this so-called flames, which look more like smoke to me. Now this one, I put Seder right in the middle of the image, or I tried to, and I figured, okay, if there's a reflection, it's going to be right there on top of Seder and I won't have to deal with it. But it was off by a little bit. So the reflection was off to the side a little bit and I ended up having to mess around with that as well. I would love to figure out how to stop those reflections, if anybody has any ideas about that. And then I think this is the last in the series, the Witch Head. Again, I wanted something diverse, something different that wasn't red to balance out the other stuff that I was doing, and wanted to see how much I could get out of the object that I thought was pretty dim. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but my sort of base assumption was it is a fairly dim nebula. So I was pretty happy with how that turned out.
That's cropped, right?
I don't think so.
It's just
It's just
turning green.
rotated, so it looks smaller.
Okay, it's not cropped. Okay, the same aspect ratio as the others. All right.
Yeah, I can't be absolutely positive about that. Well, let's see here.
I was just curious if you had an artistic reason for that. It's fine.
8,000 divided by.
It's very nice. My temptation would have been to flip it, but I think it looks great the way it is.
You mean so it would be at the horizontal aspect ratio?
No, just that the bottom on top and the top on bottom. I don't know why.
Interesting.
I don't know why. Don't ask me. It looks great.
Well, yeah, I mean, maybe that's just my own imagination about what is the witch, but I'm seeing the eye here and the nose here. Well, I guess maybe I don't know if you can see that, but I'm seeing, oh, I can't use the.
I see what you're saying, right? I don't see it that way. I see it like a little gopher.
I see. Yeah, well, I don't know if that's really, whoever named it the witch, if that's really what they were seeing, but that's why I did it that way.
Regarding the reflections, are you're thinking you have internal things reflecting off internal parts of your optical train?
I think so. And I haven't really figured out what the two reflective surfaces are. So I have very little there because it's apochromatic reflector. So there's a flattener reducer. And I noticed that that is a curved surface. So maybe that's involved. But the only other glass is whatever is right on the sensor. And then there's a cover on the camera that is a far infrared hot mirror. You know, it lets through the nearer infrared of the
So
nebula.
what is it? Is it halos, or what aberration do you see?
Here, I can bring up a different image that will,
Okay.
I think I didn't bother removing it so you can see what it looks like.
Because for halos, you can calculate where it is.
It's sort of a blue reflection. Let me see. Oh, I think it's in this.
But I was going to mention that if it's, yeah, so it's, and that's coming
It's a
from,
reflection of this star.
oh, yeah, so that's not a halo. That's something off
Yeah.
off the side of one of your mechanical pieces.
Right, and it, you know, it is like symmetrical, you know, sort of, you know, reflective across the center of the image. And so, you know, that's why I was hoping that I wouldn't get anything if I centered Seder, but I must not have centered it very well. And that's why it didn't work there. But, you know, here you can clearly see that, you know, halfway between the star and that reflection is the absolute center of the image, or at least, you know, very close.
I brought it up because one of our previous presenters talked about the world's darkest, blackest paint and how to apply it and all of that, so that you could paint the internal surfaces of your already black but not really black components and eliminate reflections.
So you think this is coming off of like a tube or something, not off of a glass, like part of the optics?
Well, so again, there's others that might be more expert than I on this, but when I've seen things that are because of not great anti-reflective coatings or something, then they're more halo around stars.
Okay.
And by calculating their size and your sensor parameters, you can determine how far away it is and verify, you know, what glass surface it is. But this is seems like it has to be super far away by that measure. So it seems like it can't be a glass thing. It has to be.
Yeah, very interesting.
John, you put your mouse over the reflection. I don't even see the reflection.
Right there.
Oh, that's.
And he
and
thinks
that's
it's coming
reflection.
from a Lantec there, or whatever that,
Oh,
however you pronounce that star.
Yep, it's
Got it.
coming from here, and this is the reflection.
Oh.
So, you know, one thing I discovered recently is that my focuser draw tube, the back end, the front end, the part that is in the telescope, is partially obstructing the full frame of the camera. I have I think I have a 3-inch focuser, and I've been talking to Stellar Review about replacing it with a 3.5-inch diameter focuser to eliminate that problem. But could that be like the edge of the focuser draw tube?
I don't know.
Possibly, but I can tell you this. You know, I don't know what the finish is of that particular focuser, but Stellar View uses on the inside of their telescopes. I was told by Alex, who's one of their engineers, like their head engineer. They use Krylon Fusion Camouflage Ultra Black spray paint, and it is very good at not reflecting everything. So that's something that if you find that you have something that you want to tone down, that would be a good thing to start with.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure.
Yeah, and this other presenter, and hi, you can remind me who it was, but you know, he had a paint that you have to airbrush on multiple layers and everything, and it's like incredibly black. But yeah, in terms of a easily applied commercial product, what Bruce is suggesting is a good way to go. But yeah, I don't know, Bruce, that their focuser draw tubes and stuff would be coated with that as well. It might just be anodized aluminum, which can
That
be,
may be the case. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, it's a
Um,
feather. It's not their brand of focus.
Feather Touch.
But I
Yeah.
don't know what it's
but yeah, that
You
also
talked
goes
about-
back to what I
Sorry.
was saying about, you know, full frame camera. You know, everything has to be ginormous, right? A 3.5-inch focuser and the big filters and everything really has to scale.
Yes, I already.
Big
I've-
image circle on,
Yeah, I'm getting some other anomalies that I've been working with Stellar View on. They're not really visible at this scale, but you know, Isaac, who is their customer service rep now, has been working with me a little bit and suggesting that the focuser might be causing other that obstruction by the focuser might be causing other problems as well. So, you know, maybe eventually I will do that. I think that those are hard to get right now, the focusers.
So the shape of that reflection makes me think that it's off some optical surface. But if you suspect any shiny surface in the adapters, tubes, or in the reducer flattener, since I have the TS 3-inch reducer flattener, which is basically the same that Stellar View has, I found advantageous to use a flocking material instead of paint. It's actually darker than paint. And you don't need to worry about the infrared with flocking material. And the one I got it from Scope Stuff. It's pretty good.
How thick is it?
I can measure it for you. Get a caliper.
While he's doing that, that was John Hayes that Glenn was talking about.
yeah. So you could watch that on YouTube if you really want to find the world's darkest paint.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so
it's pretty amazing that they have like a Batman figure or a dragon or something 3D printed thing, and they paint it black, and you can't see it, period. It's just not there.
Wow.
it's 5200th of a millimeter with the backing paper, and the backing paper itself is 15. So I think it's in the end is going to be about 4/10 of a millimeter.
What do you do with that thing?
It's a self-adhesive, so you stack it on whatever surface is reflecting.
So you put it inside your focuser tube?
Yeah, I flocked the inside of my focuser tube, all of my adapters,
Okay.
the 48 millimeter output of the focal reducer, same thing.
Were you able to see what was shiniest, and how did you go about doing, like, sort of setting up a way to figure out what was shining?
Oh, that was relatively easy, because I just I removed the camera from the filter wheel, and I pointed the telescope in the daytime sky, and you immediately see what's shining.
Okay, I'll try that. Thank you.
Sure.
And Bruce, remind me, didn't you have some super tiny imperfection or something that was causing a weird diffraction? Was that your Stellar View?
I had an issue with an Astrodon filter at one point that I was some issue. It kind of looked like rays of light, but I don't recall anything with my Stellar View.
I thought it was, I don't know. Something that you were waiting for them to,
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Yes. They had a problem with coatings on the 152s on one run of the 152 telescopes. And the coating shop that they sent the objectives out to didn't get the edges perfect. And it was causing a diffraction spike, a single diffraction spike in bright stars. And they unfortunately could not fix that. They needed to get brand new objectives, and that took a while. It took about a year
So-
for that replaced.
totally different aberration than what we're seeing here. But
Right.
that one was interesting because it was the objective versus something way down at the camera end. But yeah.
Can I ask a beginner question? So I have a ASI 1600 train, John. So I was thinking of upgrading to like the GWO 2600, which is the APS-C format, or possibly 6200. So how do you decide if your imaging train with the current focuser and stuff will match with your camera sensor size? Is there a way to calculate that? Or because when I did 1600, right, ASI 1600, I never calculated it. I just got everything and it fitted my refractor and it just worked. I never calculated anything. So if I wanted to have an APS-C format, is there a way to know that, okay, my imaging train will use the entire sensor or will cause vignetting?
Yeah, I don't know exactly myself. Maybe someone else here does.
Well, some telescope manufacturers publish the image circle, right, which would be an indication, and there's a difference between, at least for reflectors, there's a difference between the image circle and then an image circle that's really flat, right? Because you have some a curvature or what have you in the image if you go too wide.
Yeah. And
So,
there's
so basically the telescope manufacturer is the place where you will go and find out.
Well, they should tell you if it's not published. You should still be able to ask them, what is the image circle at the focal plane, and so you can, you want your sensor to be inside of that, and then if that's bigger than your focuser draw tube, right, you need a bigger focuser, and if you're using filters, then you need to consider the size of the filters. And as I said, if you're doing monochrome with narrowband filters, that can really drive your price. The ASI 1600 with the ZWO filter wheel is kind of a special combination of stuff where the filters are super close to the imaging sensor. They're like 10 or 11 millimeters from the imaging sensor, so you can get away with the smallest filters that are manufactured. So you can, it's kind of a sweet spot for narrowband filter prices. And as soon as you start going up in sensor size, then you have to buy bigger
filters.
you probably for APS-C you probably have to have 2-inch filters, and then I don't even know from there, right, what the diagonal of a full frame sensor is.
Okay.
But that's how big the filter would have to be, and bigger still depending on how far it was in your filter wheel from the sensor.
And also vignetting is only part of the story. The other problem is having a depth field sufficiently flat for imaging. Mm-hmm. If you're using a refractor, not having a secondary color around the edges. Now, if you're using a mono camera, it's you can get away with it because you're going to refocus for every filter. But with an OSC, you have to get a compromise.
All right. Thanks, guys. Yeah, it helps. So another question, John, right? Is there a reason like you chose full frame because you wanted to print these things on paper or for framing?
No, I mean, I wanted the highest resolution I could get because I think that just having the options to crop or to have the options to zoom in if you don't crop, you know, are, for me, it's worth the extra processing time. Of course, there's an expense as well, but you know, I chose to do that because honestly, I thought that my stellar view was capable of imaging full frame without any modification. But as I started to mention earlier, I first changed the tubes, the extension tubes between the flattener and my camera to a wider diameter, which helped a bit with vignetting, but it didn't really solve the problems until we figured out that it was the focuser draw tube causing some problems. So, you know, if I had known that the scope wasn't really designed for full frame, I might not have picked that.
On the flip side to all this, you know, vignetting, if assuming you get the picture, but it's not as dark on the, you know, it's brighter in the center. Every image is vignetted. I mean, there's
Yes.
no image that's not vignetted, and you can deal with that with flats, right? So that vignetting by itself is not a problem. It's like where it's cropped, you know, like, so it's vignetted, you know, infinitely. And, you know, like the image circle doesn't match the sensor. Okay, that has it. But that doesn't mean you throw away the image. That means you crop out the middle and maybe you wasted money on getting that big, you know, sensor if you're in that situation. But again, it's not the end of the world, you know.
Right, except
yeah,
if it causes aberrations like
yes, that's
like
a separate thing.
Isaac is suggesting, you know, even though the vignetting in my images is completely solved by flat, you know, flat correction. Yeah, there's these other artifacts which are smaller and harder to see, but if that's what it is, he calls it vignetting. Maybe there's a different name because it's really an obstruction, but you know, it is sort of the same thing. So, you know, that I think is the bigger issue, unless all of that is also outside the same area that you would otherwise crop. But in my case, it's not, you know, it's in the image. I don't need to crop it for the reduced signal that we usually think of as vignetting, or the dimming around the edges that we usually think of as vignetting. These are other artifacts that can be labeled vignetting artifacts that are not, you know, that would force you to crop, even if you want to get rid of them, it may force you to crop even if it's not completely black in the corners.
Thanks. Yeah. Okay.
But for the images you showed, right, the M33, you know, really good detail, but that was a crop, right? Because you've got a really wide field of view to get the witch head in one FOV, right?
Yeah.
So I'm imagining that M33 must be cropped quite a bit.
You might be right about that. I forget. Yeah, I do have a 3 degree wide by 2 degree tall, approximately field of view.
Yeah.
I'm going in to see how much I cropped.
Yeah, I don't recall how big the M33 is, but galaxies in general, right, are going to be a lot smaller than those wide field targets that you're showing. So
Yeah.
having the
Pretty big
resolution,
galaxy though,
is it? Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
I'm
awesome.
not seeing that I've cropped.
Okay. Well, maybe that, like Hai says, maybe that's a big one.
I mean,
yeah,
that
yeah.
and Andromeda, right? The two biggest in the sky. So
Yeah, it is big, but it fits on an APS-C sensor with that kind of focal length.
Yeah, I did crop quite a bit from the M33. I can show you here.
But it demonstrated your point about you know, having the the resolution so that you can crop.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, it
Yeah.
makes a
Yeah.
big difference, right? You can just crop that.
yeah.
Yeah, another thing which I struggle with is the with the ASI 1600, which Francisco also uses. Like I've learned to live with it now, but it's 12-bit and it star saturates super easily if you expose it too long. And they all become white. You lose color really fast. And there are techniques to separately shoot RGB stars and then they merge them back. But it seems like this camera helps you with keeping, as you mentioned, not saturate the stars.
Well, what gain and exposure do you use?
I have now settled to 139, but earlier I used to use 200 gain 200 when I used to saturate all of them.
Well,
very
I tend
quickly.
to use 75 for the RGB, you know,
Okay.
75 in 4 minutes or 75 in 2 minutes.
Okay.
I mean, you're going to saturate a few stars, but
Yeah.
I mean, of course, if you shoot near Alnitak or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if you, assuming that you're talking about not super bright stars, I think
Yeah.
you should be able to get away with 75 is, you know, these gain numbers are odd, right? What you really want to talk about is like how many photons per ADU or something like that. So 139 that you were using is 1-to-1.
Yeah.
Each photon
Unity.
that hits the pixel is
Yeah.
a thing, and 75 is, you know, like 2-to-1. So if you're talking about something bright, you know, you can afford the 2-to-1.
I have a 294. When I image from the valley, I use the gain is 4 electrons per ADU. So it's the minimum that I can get. It's way less than 1.
Yeah, so you might try that. Just, you know, turning
Okay.
down your gain a little bit, Pawan.
Okay.
I don't have that problem so much with I use a 1600 and
Well, and if you're doing narrowband and you're shooting emission nebula, maybe you don't care so much about the star colors, right? And you're would rather spread the dynamic range of the, you know, right side of the histogram across a wider, you know,
Mhm.
wider number of ADU. So yeah, but the 200 with the ASI 1600, I mean, that's really a narrow band filter gain
Yeah.
setting. Yeah.
There's a, you said you were thinking about getting the 2600 camera. There's a very long discussion on cloudy nights about many people with that camera are having oil leaks from the thermal pads,
Oh, I see. Yeah.
and it's actually getting on the sensor for them. So I would recommend before you buy that camera that you at least read through that thread. ZWO is finally responding on that thread about what they're doing for the people and the guarantees they're offering the people. But you know, don't get that camera without being aware of that possibility. And they are also claiming that after a certain manufacture date, the problem is solved. I believe they said October of this year. Cameras made after that will not have the problem because they've changed the thermal pads.
Yeah, I think I have heard about it. I haven't read it, but thanks for mentioning it. I will definitely go and read that. It's like thermal paste on the back, right, for coolant, and it heats up and leaks through. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's the it's for conducting the heat from the back of the chip or the front, whatever side of the chip it is, to the tech cooler. It's something to improve the conductivity, the heat transfer between those two. That is the pad that I think is the suspect one.
there's a comment from Rob who doesn't have a mic. So I'll read it. And Rob says, the reflection looks sort of like a tiny version of the ones that you get on Celestron 6 SCTs due to reflections off the baffle. So that's similar to the idea that the problem is the inside of the focuser interrupting the light path. And Bruce seconds that.
Thank you. That's very interesting.
All right, well, we've been going an hour and a half, so I'm unless somebody has a burning question, I say, let's thank John for his excellent presentation. and
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, John.
Thank you all. I
John.
I appreciate the comments and the suggestions that you gave very much.
All right. Well, we'll see everyone in January in 2022. Bye-bye.
Very much.
Bye. Happy New Year. Bye.
Bye.
Happy New Year.
Year.